What is up, chicken nuggets? Welcome to the first ever inaugural episode of the Sports Cards Are Dope podcast. I am your host on this magic carpet ride, Dr. Tyler Tarver. And you know what this means? Do you know what this means? This means this is the worst this show will ever be. This podcast is where we are talking about sports cards. Every now and then we might throw in some other stuff. We're going to talk sports. Might talk some trading cards, TCG-ish, if you will, Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z. I'll try to throw that in whenever I can, even though whenever I post shorts on that, nobody ever likes them because like 3 of us watched that in high school. I remember after school, after basketball practice, we'd go home and my cousin would play Super Smash Bros. On 64, and then we would eat some bagel bites, and we go to our AOL chat rooms and be like, hey, y'all, let's talk about Harry Potter. And then we watch us some Dragon Ball Z. But you didn't come here for that because we are here to talk about sports cards like we're in those AOL chat rooms. And I want to sprinkle in a little pop culture when I can, have on some guests, have different people in, get interviews, do talks. I kind of want to just see where this goes. Who knows? Who knows? I want to throw some spice on this podcast like it's a special sauce from Chick-fil-A on that mac and cheese. I don't think they do anything special. I just know that that's the only thing my kids will eat, chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. And I want to try to connect everything that we do here to sports cards, this industry, and those little quadrilaterals of strong dudes that we love so much. Again, I'm your host, Dr. Tyler Tarver. And for this first ever, have I mentioned that? First ever episode, I want to talk about the big 3 grading companies. Now, you're like, well, big 3, CGC's up there now. They're the 3rd largest, and they're actually number 2 if it's Pokemon, TCG. I get it. I feel like Becket deserves at least a mention in this conversation because they should be. I say they should be top 3. They should be number 1, in my opinion. I say that all the time to people. They should be number 1. So I had to include them. So we're talking about why these big 3 tech companies can be related to, big 3 grading companies can be related to the big 3 tech companies. My main job is education. I've worked as a tech director. I've been a central office. I've worked and I've seen the evolution of where, as 9th graders, they had to go into CBA and they had to learn about Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and all these other things. But now at this point, 98, 99% of the districts I work with are Google, and Google's taken over. So, and then there's a company that I loved using that I hardly ever use when it comes to those things. And we're going to talk about that as well. So before we dive in, I would love personally, selfishly, biasly for you to subscribe or follow if you're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Apple, please don't suppress me for relating you to the grading company that is doing the worst year after year. But if you would take a moment, go on there, and if you want to, jump to conclusions, like that joke from Office Space. If you want to jump to conclusions and give me a 5-star rating, that's always helpful, I think. And since it's the first episode, I think I'm going to drop 2 or 3 at the beginning. I'll space them out on YouTube, drop them all on Spotify and or Apple. So if you see a break in there, that's why I'm trying to pace it out, toss in more downloads, try to get us boosted on the little rating stuff. See what happens. Who knows? Low expectations. That's how I live my life. I set the standard, set the bar low, and then I just try to, just barely step over it. One of my favorite jokes when I was a kid, and again, I was like 6th grade. My favorite joke growing up was 2 guys walk into a bar, 3rd guy ducked. I don't know. That's it. It's barely related to what I just talked about. Okay, so let's settle the grading debate like we're out on the playground and we're trading Pokemon cards for rocks that look like crystals. So the first grading company that I want to talk about is PSA. PSA, which is the Microsoft of the grading world, okay? And I want to talk about why does PSA dominate. Well, I say dominate. Why do they have such a hold on our industry, on the collectors in our industry? Like Microsoft Word has a stronghold over like Gen X and boomers, like over your parents. I need to write it up in Word. And you're like, just use a Google Doc, we can share. They're like, I'll just write a Word and I'll email it to you. Why does PSA still have this hold, and why is it like Microsoft Office? I think personally, I relate those two because it's ubiquitous and it's kind of like the default. Like it's default. Like even for a long time, people would use Google Docs and call it Word. They'd call it Microsoft Word. So it became the shorthand for typing up documents, just like PSA 10 has become the shorthand for market dominance, if you will. Like if you're ever relating, well, this is what it's got. What's the pop count? A lot of times we'll go to PSA. All right. And I'll give you some numbers. This is from GymRate. They're awesome to follow on Instagram. But they said PSA graded 602,000 sports cards. I'm just looking at sports cards. So if you're like, I saw 1 point something million, that's what TCG and Pokemon included. Sports cards only are the numbers I'm giving you today. In December of 2024, PSA graded 602,000 sports cards, just over half a milli. All right. The price premium on PSA 10s, you're paying a premium. Usually it's like 2 to 3 times a PSA 9, but it will over stuff, not including brand new release. Okay, so brand new release, we'll talk about a little bit when we get into SGC, but stuff looking, 3 to 6 months on especially modern cards, your PSA 10s are going to have a 10 to 20% premium over a lot of other grading companies. And I relate that to Microsoft because Office 365, they have subscription fees. They've got premiums on what it costs. And honestly, I've worked as a dean of a college, and a lot of colleges are still stuck in this Microsoft world, even though the students that are coming into their college are like, we just spent 13 years, 12 grades in kindergarten. And unless, maybe you did a victory lap, they've spent 13 years using Google for everything, and now they're having to readjust to essentially a lesser product because that's what the college is used to. That's what they see as the top tier in writing up documents and sending them into your professor. Okay, PSA, to use another analogy, PSA is like the Starbucks of grading. It's widely loved. People use it all the time. It's a part of our life. If you're traveling and you're like, I like those coffee shops, they're like mom and pop coffee shops. But if you're traveling and you want coffee, you're probably gonna have to stop at a Starbucks at some point. But it does get criticized for being too corporate, too slow, costly, and not as personal as like a mom and pop that would walk in and you mean more to them than you do to PSA. And another flaw that, and again, I want to talk about the flaws. I already talked about they make money. That's what a lot of people care about the most. So I got get that off my back. They have long wait times a lot of times. You're looking at, and again, they've trimmed it down. It's not near like the 8 to 12 months it was, at the height. It's just like a year and a half to get some of them back. But you're still going to wait longer than we will with some other companies that we're going to talk about, okay? And honestly, it's a lack of personal touch, lack of communication. Here's the vibe I get. I don't matter to them. It's like they treat it like I am lucky to be able to submit to them and I am lucky to be able to pay them more money. And that's the way it feels. It doesn't feel like I, as the collector, or even, times to get them and grade them and sell them, I don't feel like I'm important. It's like it's like I'm lucky to show up to their party, okay? It's like the friend that you had in high school who became, like, you were really close friends and then they became super successful and now they're tough to pin down and they won't reply to your text all the time. And when they do reply with like, okay, or cool, or that's great, or a thumbs up tap back, it's like, oh, you're lucky to get that from me. You know what I mean? It's like, just text your boy back. Like, I was there when you was a nobody, you know what I'm saying? So it's a more of like a one-sided relationship, but they are what a lot of people use because they are more prominent. They're more graded. Like I just said, 602,000 in 1 month. They're more graded with, and you're going to see more of them at most shows you go to and online. One thing I've found is, because I've had people come to my table and I've done a couple repacks. Shout out your boy, tarvercars.com. I don't think I have any repacks. I don't know why I shouted that out. I have no repacks available right now because they sold out because I did a very low number, so it sounded like it sold out. But whenever I have repackers come to my table and they start looking, I have a lot of SGC on there, got some Arena Club, got some CGC as well. And they'll come up and they're like, I want to get this card and put in my repack. But as a repacker, I have to have comps. I think one of the things that encourages is kind of this cycle, this cyclic thing that gets people more and more in on PSA is you can check your comps. Even on cards that I want, I'll go check a comp. I've been on a Michael Jordan PSA 7 Warp Speed. And I bid on a Fanatics Collect last night. And I went on to eBay because I wanted to search comps. I want to know, even though I want that card, I'm willing to pay up to a couple $100 for it. I want to know that I'm not paying double what it should be worth, or I want to feel better if I'm paying half of what it should be worth. So it's like, I'll go look at comps. And I think PSA, because they do more grading, they have more comps. So people feel more comfortable kind of staying in that cycle of buying it. And so that's Tyler's opinion on why you see even more people still kind of sticking with PSA. But if I'm looking at, like, if I step back and look at people I've interacted with online, people I've interacted with at shows, the people that are like, and I'm not saying like, oh, I've got more PSA, but I'm down with other stuff. The people that are like PSA diehards, like PSA is king in all of my comments. The people that are PSA diehards, I felt like mostly it's two groups, okay? So you got your flippers, because I said, you're making money, so you could make a little bit more, like 10, 20% more on a lot of cards. And so they're going to do PSA because it's easier to sell, because there's more collectors that are comfortable with PSA. And they do have a premium on certain cards. So you're going to see those flippers really push PSA, and then the old heads, like they go around to some tables and they're like, well, I've been using PSA for 20 years. You know what I mean? Like they were the first grade. I think they were the first grading. It was the first ever. Oh, I should have Googled this. My bad. You're going to shout, scream. This is where I lose you. This is where you block me on the Spotify's and the Apple podcast. Was the first ever graded card that Honest Wagner, the Gretzky one that was like trimmed. Was that the one that number one? I'm pretty sure that was number one. I'd have to look. It's been a year or two since I've seen any info on it, but I think that was the first ever graded card. So PSA's been around for a while. While Becket was the more popular one 6, 7, 8 years ago, PSA has been in the industry for a long, long time. Okay. Speaking of companies in the industry for a long time, this company's been for a couple decades, and it's personally my favorite. They were the first grading company I ever used, ever. First ever submission I ever made was 4 or 5 years ago, was to this company. I've been submitting to them. I've submitted to PSA. I've never submitted to Becket because their website looks like it was made in 1974. Actually, that's too early. There's no websites. 1996, better reference. Bam, got them. It looks like it was made back when the Atlanta Olympics were around. And so I haven't used Becket to submit, but this one I submitted to more. I have done collabs with them before, so you can say biased if you want, but I've used them before we collabed. I use them after we collab. Like, I love this company, and I think they're great, and I try to keep most of my PC stuff. Like, if I have a PC of a card, and I have a, spoiler alert, I'm talking about SGC, an SGC 10 and a PSA 10, I'm going to sell the PSA 10, keep the SGC 10. Because one, I think they're good at grading, and two, if, that card has a premium, more, again, I could stick it on buy it now on eBay for whatever price the PSA 10s are selling for and let it wait. And a lot of times I will sell those. I sell them constantly. Every week I have sales on eBay that'll go for PSA 10 because I'll stick it at a buy it now for a PSA 10 value. But you just have more customers right now comfortable with PSA. But I think that gap is shortening, and not that it'll overtake and PSA is going out of business. Like, they're owned by the same company. Like, collectors wants PSA and SGC to do well. So let's talk about numero dos, SGC, which I relate to the Google workspace of grading, okay? So let's talk, how is it rising the ranks like Google Docs did whenever it hit the scene like Timmy Chalamet? How is SGC becoming more, more acceptable, more used, and more just like people are more comfortable and they're sending in more and more to them? Why is it still trending upward at a pretty good rate as compared to a lot of grading companies? Big reasons. They're quick. You got 10-day turnaround? Like, I'll literally throw my SGC cards in the mail, and usually 10 to 12 days later, they're back on my doorstep. I don't have to sit there and, man, I wish I had where's that card? Forget that. Like, you ever forget you have cards submitted? You're like, oh yeah, it's been 45 days or, 2 months. They're back. Like, they'll get back. The only time I haven't had them back is because one time the post office lost them at one of their like transition sites. So it wasn't SGC's fault. It was me for using USPS, but I still use them. I'm not learning that lesson. Okay. They're quick. They look pretty, in my opinion, I like the black border. I like the tux, as they call it, the tuxedo case. I think it looks really great, and I think it looks sweet in your case. It feels sturdy and strong. I like it. And also their customer service is fantastic. You reach out to them, they're going to work it out, and they're going to go above and beyond. They're going to do the right thing. They're not that person you did a deal with on Instagram. It's like, oh, just give it another week or two. Like, they are PayPal goods and services. Like, they got your back if something goes wrong. There's a card shop in Little Rock, Game Day. They're awesome. Check them out if you're ever in Arkansas. And I was talking to him, and Jim was talking about he had sent off his great cards to SGC, and they were coming back, and then like the post office, like something happened. They either sent it to the wrong place. I don't know if it's SGC's fault, post office, whatever. But he reached out, and SGC was like, we will pay you back for the full value of every card. Like, we will do that. And like, if you did that, I think they were he was gonna have to sign something being like, hey, like, no matter what happens, I'll take that money and I won't get those cards even if they show up later. And Jim was like, no, I'm going to wait it out. And they end up coming back later, like that person that they shipped them to accidentally or wrongly or whatever. They finally came back months later, and then they were like, hey, we got him. They sent it to him. They were going to have his back, whichever option he chose. So if we look at that like Google Workspace, Google, if you've ever used Docs, Sheets, Slides, it's convenient, it's quick to use, it's collaborative, it's very like easy to find tutorials on how to fix certain things. Like they don't overwhelm you with all their other stuff. They're like, here's what you got. This is what you want to, grade your cards? Here, go into the app, bop, bop, bop. It's back to you, okay? I've got a stack of cards I want to send to PSA. I haven't sent it in months because I don't want to go through the process. It's not a hard process. It's just like, I got to go on the website. I don't do it as often. I use the SGC app whenever I do it. I'm just like, bam, 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 okay? Let's talk numbers. You ready? Let's talk numbers. Gym rate in December of 2024, they said that of sports card, remember sports cards only, 124,000 sports cards in the month of December were graded by SGC. Now, you're like, 602,000 is more, Tyler. Awesome. I used to teach high school math. You get a B+. Congratulations. But to elevate that math, that is about 20% of what PSA graded in sports cards. So if PSA is 100% of what they graded, SGC graded about a 20% equivalent. So it's 1/5. Now you're like, well, that's 1/5. That's not a ton. It used to be lower than that, but it has slowly been moving up. That's how numbers work. Like companies that are doing a good job and people get more trust and they get more market, like they're in the market more, they're going to keep going up and doing better. Again, collectors wants both. Like, do you think collectors is going to turn SGC and just merge it into PSA? I don't think they want to, because SGC has a great brand. There's people that, just like there's PSA diehards, there are SGC diehards that only want to submit to that, okay? The tuxedo slab adds that little touch of uniqueness that I think a lot of people like, just like Google Docs has like a minimalist thing. Like I like and I'm comfortable with their minimalist interface. That's what I like. Plus, among other, mainly it's a collaboration thing, but the minimalist interface, don't give me like 90% of junk I'm not going to use at the top of Microsoft Word. Give me the stuff I need and let's roll with it, okay? Fast turnaround times, they're go-to for a lot of people that don't want the delay or the upcharge of PSA. I have to look at it, but I'm pretty sure, I think it's 4 of the top 5 highest value sales of sports cards in the history of sports, like recorded actual sales. 4 of the top 5 were SGC cards, okay? SGC is like, it's like Netflix circa 2013, okay? It's coming in strong. It's challenging the big dogs. I'm looking at you, Blockbuster. They're challenging the big dogs, and they're becoming more and more comfortable. And, there's that scale. I can't remember what the name of the scale is, but it's our early adopter scale. And it's like there's 1/6 of people are early to trends and things that are popular. And then it takes a while for everybody, especially the mainstream, to catch up. So I think they're moving past early adopters. And again, they've been around for 2 decades, but they're moving past that with a lot of people. And I think it's gaining momentum, especially among, and this is me, it shows younger collectors. They don't care and they don't want to wait. They're used to that TikTok swipe, swipe, swipe. They don't want to sit there and watch a 45-minute YouTube video. They're going to watch a 1-minute TikTok. They want it fast. They want their cards back. They're ready and they don't care. They don't have 10 years. I've been submitting to PSA for 10 years. They don't care about that. Okay. They want that company to get them their cards back as soon as possible. Okay. And again, I am biased because they're the first company I ever used. I've had good experiences with them every time I've ever used them. And I have collaborated with them before. Again, this is it's not a paid ad unless SGC wants to send me a check. I'll let your boy. But I think they're great. And I think they're like, I do have that connection because it's like, the first company I sent to, it's like, like your first kiss. You're like, can I say that without being creepy? Like, it's like, I have this connection like, oh, cool. I'll remember that forever. No matter what happens, you were the first people that I submitted my cards to. So financially, if we're looking at numbers like resale, I've seen the greatest and highest return on SGC cards in three scenarios. One, vintage cards. Like SGC is known for being the best at grading vintage. Like they're known for that. They're the best vintage graders. I don't know. There's like, they never say their names. There's like 1 or 2 dudes and they brought on a bunch from other companies too. They are like the best for vintage. I don't think many people would disagree with that. Okay. The second thing, and where I've seen a lot of return, especially on modern cards, first to market, their quick turnaround. If you want quick turnaround PSA, you got to pay like $150, usually $100 to $200 to get it back quicker. With PSA or with SGC, they're going to send it back quick anyways. And so I sent in, it was back when like Franz Wagner and Josh Giddey, their rookie year, they were kind of like some new rookies that people liked. And I had like a Prism green of them. I think I had cracked ice, and I had like 2 or 3 like variations of their Prism rookie card. And I sent them off to SGC, got them back, and they came in as 10s. And I went and did a show like the next week. So I had them on there before anything was popping up on eBay. So like I had the first 10s from any grading company of these cards, and I was selling them and trading them at a value of like $100 plus. Now, when PSA came in, yeah, the PSA cards started, the first PSA 10s popped up. Yeah, they were selling high, but after 2 or 3 months, all of them were selling for like, 30% of what I sold mine at, because now the market is more flooded. There's more available. If somebody wanted one, that first to market thing doesn't exist. The market's there, and there's tons, tens or thousands, in this case, thousands of them that are popping up. So if you have a new product, if I'm, I don't rip a lot of wax, but if I ripped a brand new product, I'm going to send those first cards in SGC immediately. Anything that's a $10 to $20 card, I'm sending to SGC immediately. I'm getting them back in a week or 2. I'm tossing them on eBay on bids. I am the only 10 available. If 2 people want it, bidding war, my boys. You know what I mean? Like, I'm getting it to where it's going out. It's the first one out there. Also, they do a good job at grading sports cards. They are consistent. The half grades make it more accurate. It makes it harder to comp because there's not as many half grades. And, if I had an SGC 9, I can compare that with a BGS 9 or CGC 9 or a PSA 9. But SGC 8.5, it's harder to find exact comps. So it's like you've got to find 8s and 9s and figure out something in between those. So yes, it does add that variable there, but it does allow the cards to be more accurately graded. All right. So now let's move on to the one who, in my opinion, should be number 1. Because when I was a kid, I had their little magazines, and I would check blocks. Me and my dad and I would sit down and we'd check off these cards. And we're trying to collect the whole set of 88 Donruss and mark them off on this checklist. And it is the name that is synonymous with sports card collecting. And that's Becket, aka BGS, which is now the Apple of the grading world. And I know you're thinking, well, everybody uses an iPhone, Tyler. Don't think Apple like hardware, think Apple software. Yeah, I know you use your iPhone every day, but how often are you using Pages now? How often are you using, Keynote or Numbers? Like, most people hardly ever use them. Yeah, it looks dope, just like Becket slabs look dope. Sports cards are dope. See what I did there? Boom. Said the title of the movie in the movie. But as it's moving, like as these companies evolve, I feel like Becket has not optimized on their brand like they should. I'm going to do a whole episode on just like what Becket could do to turn things around. And I think I just heard they got an influx of money. If it's like the last influx of money, they'll absolutely do nothing with it to help their company. But if it's, hopefully they do some good stuff, because I want Becket. You don't want just PSA to be the only company for sports card grading. You don't want that as a collector. I don't care if you're a PSA diehard. You don't want that, because what it does is it gives them monopoly on the market. And then when they want to raise their prices or they want to take long to get you, there's no competition that breeds companies taking advantage. We've seen that throughout history of companies and governments. Whenever there is no checks and balances on it or no other competition, they take advantage of things because they are companies who want to make money. And again, I say some of them are better at customer service. All companies have to make money or they are no longer a company. Okay. So let's talk Beckett. Arguably, CGC is the 3rd overall. I should have put them in. You're like, you should have put CGC. I probably should have, but I feel like I owed Becket this part of the conversation because yes, CGC has been more like Pokemon centric, but in December 2024, CGC graded twice as many sports cards as Becket, 34K as opposed to Beckett's 17K. And for the sake of brand and this, again, convoluted analogy that I've created, Becket, we're going to stick with, because Becket is the Apple of sports cards. Because, when I first started like speaking at conferences about, doing trainings for people and showing them different ways they can incorporate technology into their school and their classroom, my first one was on a thing called iTunes U. iTunes U is this awesome thing that educators could use. You go into iTunes U, you could put in books, you could create something. It was awesome. And it, like, in my mind, I was like, this should be what every school when I became a principal, I was having students create like books and stories, and they would do projects where they're building it out. Teachers were going to put every single one of their courses as books in iTunes U. And then as I'm speaking at these conferences, I notice not a ton of people are coming to my rooms. And I'm walking by, and there were tons of people in these rooms doing Google trainings, Google Forms, Sheets, Slides, all this stuff, because they're using it. It's the program they're using, and Google was investing in that. Apple, I supported iTunes U longer than Apple did. Apple quit doing anything to it for years. I was like, I need to shift over and start using Google more and more, and shifted everything over to that because Apple stopped investing in the education side of what they do. They just did. You can look at it. Yeah, they put money towards it, but it was like maintenance, not pressure forward. I feel like Beckett's done the same. They're maintenance. They are not trying to move anything forward. They are not trying to build their brand in the ways that actually build successful brands. They are not marketing it well. They are not collaborating with influencers, or I say influencers, I know it's a bad word, creators. They are not doing the things it takes to build a company or a brand in 2025. They are not doing it. Again, we just started 2025, but you know what I mean. In this, the day of our Lord, 2024, 25, whatever year it is, they're not investing in the ways that make a difference. And that's apparent. And you're seeing it now after a few years in the steady decline of Becket. Now, are there certain people that feel more comfortable buying a Becket slab? Sure. Do they look dope? Yes. Are subgrades awesome? Absolutely. But guess what is also dope and sleek and cool? Apple Pages. And when was the last time you used, Apple Pages. When was the last time you used that? When was the last time you used, Keynote to do a presentation? You don't. I quit using it 6 years ago in presentations. I used Keynote for all my presentations. Then I went to Lavaca, Arkansas, and they didn't have a way to plug in my Mac computer to their Apple stuff, or to their PC, their Microsoft computer. So I had to download it as a PowerPoint, re-upload it right before, and I'm sweating because I'm about to go on, and I'm missing slides because videos wouldn't upload. So I quit using it. I use Google Slides from then on out, because it's accessible on my computer, their computer, anywhere in the world. It's easier to use, and people don't want these roadblocks in doing presentations or in grading cards. They don't want to wait 45 to 50 days to get their cards back when you're only grading 17,000 sports cards a month, okay? Now, the pros, Becket, the brand, the name is there. It should be number one. A BGS 10 Black Label is still the Rolex of slabs. Like, it is rare, it's valuable, and it is a flex if you have a Becket Black Label, okay? The weakness and reason they're dropping to 4 and they're only grading 17,000 cards in December, which, by the way, in December, Beckett's cards, that number, that is 13% of what SG. If you took SGC, 100% of the cards they graded, Becket graded 13% of that number. If you take PSA 602,000 they graded in December of sports cards, Becket graded 3%. I'm going to say it again slower. Pause. Dramatic effect. 3%. Okay? Sorry, I mentioned Timothy Chalamet earlier. Now I'm getting drama, baby. Holla at me, Oscars. I'm here all day. Sports Cards Are Dope podcast. We got an Oscar after one episode. You know what? I'm not against it. Don't think I deserve it because this is mid at best, but I'm open to it, okay? I love the name. I love the look. I love the subgrades of Becket. But BGS is blockbuster circa 2010. Nostalgic, but they're refusing to adapt to what they need to do to be successful going forward. They're relying on their past glory without innovating for the future. What does Becket, this is my question to you, throw in the comments. If you're on Spotify, I think they have comments. YouTube, throw in the comments. If not, give me a 5-star rating and put it in there. Whatever, no pressure. Follow your heart, like Kelly Clarkson said. What does Becket need to do in order to get their trend lines back in order, to get going back up and be trending in the right direction? Again, I want them to be successful. SGC is my favorite. I'm cool with PSA. I'm cool with Becket. I won't submit to them, but I'll buy their cards. Like, my most expensive card I've ever purchased, which just came in today, I saw at the post office. I paid almost $6,000 for this card. It is in a Becket slab. My MJ rookie is in a Becket slab. I'm totally cool with it because, and this is where I want to summarize this whole conversation, I am okay with it because it's cards over cases. As much as I love SGC, I don't have to have a card in an SGC slab. If I see somebody come up and they have a PSA, only PSA stuff, I went at the National and I have a lot of SGC slabs and I have some Becket, some PSA, and I went to the Nationals a couple years ago and I was going around and, I'm sitting there and people are like, can I look at your cards? You have people trade for them. A lot of people don't care. They like the cards. They see the value. They want it, PC, whatever. But then I went to one table and it was this old head and his kid and they were just like lined up And it literally looked like they were selling used cars at an auction. It was like trade night, and they're standing there just, like selling. You could see he was one of those guys that his cards are worth more because they're in his hand. And then I'm walking over, and I'm just looking at their cards, just glancing to see if there's anything I want to go for. And the younger son, he's like a teenager. He was like, "Hey, can I look at your cards?" He asked to look at my cards. I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." So he opens it up, he looks through it, and he sees that it's mostly SGC. He does the thing where you like flip, every like 20% of the cards you flip. Hey man, I think I'm good. I think I'm good. You could tell he was nervous to say it because he asked me to get my cards out and show him. But I knew exactly he didn't mess with SGC. He's PSA because they're flippers. That's what you could tell. That's what these dudes, their primary thing with cards was flipping it. They value the case over the card. They did not look at one of my cards. There's cards in there. If they wanted to, they could have seen it. I like that. Cracked it and sent it. If you're just solely PSA, he could have looked at it and said, "I have an awesome card." He has no clue what cards I had because he only looked at my cases. Cards over cases. Cards over cases. I don't think I've ever heard that before. I think I made it up. If not, shout out, footnote to whoever did, but I'm pretty sure I made it up. Cards over cases. Look at the card first. Then decide if it's worth the value for you, if you're buying it or trading for it in the case that it's in. Cards over cases. Okay, so real quick, top 5 lists. I love doing lists. Top 5 lists. Grading companies and their pop culture equivalent. You ready? I say pop culture. Their tech giant equivalent. I'm going to recap for you. PSA. It's like Microsoft Office. It's reliable, but everyone complains about subscription cost. That's with Microsoft and a lot of the upcharges. SGC. It's like Google Workspace. That's the disruptor that is stealing hearts and market share. Okay, it's slowly, because that's how trend lines work. PSA still creates more. I know they do, but it's called trend. Like, look at the percent increase year to year. I think December PSA was down 5% from the previous, I don't know if it's previous month or previous year, according to Gem Rate. SGC was up 13%. It's percentages. It's how numbers work. BGS, it's Apple's software, Pages, Keynote, numbers. It's sleek. Got the right name, but it's sinking in quicksand like it's in Princess Bride, okay? CGC, I'm gonna throw you in here. I'm gonna relate you because I couldn't come up with any more, like I write my papers in this. CGC is like Spotify. It's growing in popularity, especially for niche collectors, like early Spotify, okay? And then you got ungraded cards. I'm gonna throw that in. Ungraded, raw cards, if you will. They're like the vinyl records of collecting. It's old school cool, and there's some purists that are like, nah, man, I just want the card. Totally cool. I respect that game. I have cards that I've taken, I bought in slabs from multiple companies, and I've cracked them out, thrown them in a mag because I like the way they look, and I don't want that number sitting there making me feel like it's pulling my heart away from the card I love. All right. So closing thoughts. Here's the question I want to throw to you. What does your grading choice say about you? I'm going to give you my opinion. What is your grading choice? Like, and again, it doesn't mean like, yes, the people you're going to see this stereotype, the stereotypes I've come up with more with, they're going to be the people that are diehards, like, PSA is king, PSA only, or Becket, I stick with Becket, I've been with Becket forever, or SGC. The people that are hardcore on one company are going to lean more this, but hopefully you spread it out and you've got cards across all these companies, okay? PSA, if PSA is your go-to and your ride or die, you're probably a flipper or an old head, okay? And if you're like, is that they're talking about us? Maybe. Look in the mirror. All right. If you are SGC only, you're probably a vintage collector, or you're like a young person getting into the hobby and you're like, I just want my cards back and I like the way it looks. It looks dope. It's different. I don't care who your daddy used. Okay. I like a company that does a good job of grading because that's literally what we're paying them to do. And then if you like BGS, you're a nostalgic purist. You're like, I had the Becket guide. I use it to price my cards. I'm going to use it till the day I die. Cool. Becket, if you dare, go for it, okay? To recap, the takeaway at the end of the day, remember, it's about the card, not the case. The card, cards over cases. Checks over stripes, cards over cases. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this. If you want to go in and rate this 5 stars, I think that helps. I wouldn't know. I've never had a hit podcast. I've had podcasts. I've had non-hit. I've had podcasts with people who went on to have hit podcasts. Does that count? I don't know. Maybe it could be me someday. Maybe it could be me. I'm just kidding. I don't care. I just want to talk sports cards, have fun, and keep collecting. So if I could tell you one thing, have fun, be kind, and never stop collecting. Thank you guys for being a part of this first ever inaugural episode of Sports Cards Are Dope podcast. Love you guys. Be good. Later.